Good morning, chat. I meant to wake up earlier. I meant to have I meant to have a brainstorming session like before the stream starts. But because of Veal's subathon last night, I didn't sleep much, and I almost overslept again. By the way, um, I didn't end up having that brainstorming session, unfortunately. So we're just kind of going into this raw, I guess. Hello everyone. Hello Doge. Good morning. Yeah, so, normally on the REWorkshop, we don't talk about the basics. And the main reason, being that I figured I'd leave that to Malware Deconstructed, but, we kind of abandoned that series already, so I think I'm just going to integrate it into REWorkshop. And, another main reason behind this, another motivation behind the stream is because, the other day I kind of noticed an intern was kind of unsure what he was doing half the time. So I was like, I think a lot of people dive into malware analysis without a whole lot of knowing a whole lot, and that's fine. But I think it's important to get the basics down sometimes. What model can the iPad Pro general handle? I don't know, dude. You should stop asking me AI things. I don't know anything about AI. Right. So let me pull up our VM. I think I do want to also talk about environment setups real quick before we dive right into it. Okay. So, right. So a lot of people kind of don't know what they're doing half the time when they're setting up an environment, and I'm not gonna claim that I do, but I think it's important to get a few basics right. So first of all, a lot of people ask, what VM shall I use? What virtual machine software solution do you use? And my answer to that is use whatever you feel comfortable with. With an asterisk. The asterisk being depends on what you like, what works best, what platform you're on, etc., etc. So there's of course VMware, the most popular one, now owned by Broadcom. There's what's the other one? VirtualBox by Oracle. There's Hyper-V if you're on Windows. Now, that being said, there are other platforms like QEMU as well, especially if you're on Linux. Which one works the best kind of depends on your use case and whether or not if you care about NTVM. So let's talk about each of those with like their own pros and cons. I guess I'll bring up Notepad. Sure, why not? So let's talk about VMware. Its own pros and cons. So VMware, free, is now free as long as you have a Broadcom account, with an asterisk because it does require you having an account. But at the very least, it's better than going out of your way to find a key on a random gist somewhere on GitHub. It's owned by Broadcom. I should probably add that. Now VMware is great. The problem is that it's popular, but also popular amongst malware devs. What do I mean by that? So VMware environment is incredibly easy to detect, mainly because of VMware tools. That is basically a bridging software that is used to communicate between the host and guest. It is kind of needed to make VMware a little bit more usable on the host side. You get things like copy paste. Let me works best with VMware host tools and guests. Whenever you're done finishing installing Windows, Linux, etc., it'll ask you to install VMware tools. VMware tools is great. Enables copy paste, drag and drop, and it also enables you to set resolution a little easier so that you can fit the guest resolution a little bit easier on the host machine. You can just click view fit guest now, etc. Now the problem with this is that what is using up my CPU in the background there? What? OneDrive said, oh my god. Turn the network off. Jesus. Alright. Setting up resolution and things will be a little easier with VMware tools installed. Now the problem is VMware tools also installs a whole lot of crap that makes it super easy to detect. So of course they can just detect the presence of VMware tools, and they can also detect the system drivers used by VMware. So whenever you're done installing the guest environment, it will also install a bunch of other guest drivers that is used to interact with VMware tools, VMware in general. So that works better with on the host machine as a guest. Yeah, how do you go about finding out whether or not if your system works decent enough? I'm gonna pull up what's it called? Alkaiser? Yeah, Alkaiser. So Alkaiser is, I'm not sure, still not entirely sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. But Alkaiser is like the go-to for figuring out whether or not if your system can be detected by various malware. And your goal is not to necessarily defeat all the checks, because that's not entirely possible sometimes, but just to get around like the most popular ones. Oh. Is it? Are they no longer called that? Fine. Here we go. Maybe the one I just got was just a fork. I think the one I got might have been a fork. Anyways, Alkaiser, you can use that to detect various anti-VM stuff. So let's scroll all the way down to here. Anti-virtualization. As you can see, that a lot of the popular VM software, along with their dependencies, are listed on here. So things like, you know, the VMware system drivers and the VMware tool services and a bunch of other hardware identifiers you can use to figure out whether or not if this is a virtual machine. Commonly targeted by anti-VM detection. Now that's not, I wouldn't worry about this too much, especially if you know what you're doing, because a lot of times you can just get around the detection part if you're already hooking up with a debugger. But you know that might not always be possible, and that's also very tiresome if you have to do that every time. So personally, VMware is not my go-to because of that. Also, VMware technically by default is a type 2 hypervisor. Oh no, type 1. So if we look up type of hypervisors, So there's type 1 hypervisor and type 2 hypervisor. It is a type 2 hypervisor. So with it being a type 2 hypervisor, basically, if you don't know what the different type of hypervisor is, basically, in order to have a VM run in your machine, they run on top of something called a hypervisor. Now, since VMware is a type 2 hypervisor, it has to sit inside of the host OS, so it doesn't run as well as it could. Basically, it runs as an application on your system. We bring up this real quick. Give me a second. So, since VMware it runs as a Type 2 hypervisor, it is a little bit slow, and because of that, it also needs a lot of these software that is used to bridge between the host and guest. VMware is a Type 2 hypervisor. I mean, I could just type Type 2 hypervisor, really. So I think that is still the case even when you use Windows Virtual Machine Platform with it enabled. It's still running on top of the hypervisor platform, but it doesn't entirely count as a Type 1 just because the Virtual Machine Hypervisor thing is on. Ow. Oh my god, guys. You guys complain a whole lot. When you use Edge, dude, we're in a VM. We're in the testing environment. Your browser choice doesn't matter. Okay, that's not true, but like, you know, default is fine. Calm down. We're in the VM right now. All right. All right. So your alternative would be, if you don't want to use VMware, you should still use VMware. By the way, if you're unsure. By the way, another thing, before we move on to another VM solution, let's talk about setting up your environment. So, aside from whether or not you want to keep VMware tools around and other things that might get detected, the most important thing is still about your network setup. If you want to do VM analysis, and if you want to do malware analysis, and if you're not sure how to go about setting up your network, do not connect it to the internet. Do not connect your VM to the internet. This is very important. You either just completely remove the network virtual network adapter, or set it to host only. Don't let it sit on your network. Do not use NAT. Do not use bridge. Do nothing unless you're confident in your ability to set up a virtual in a containerized isolated environment. Otherwise, the attacker is going to be able to get to your other PCs on the network, and that's not great, especially if it can spread across network. What about VPN? That doesn't help because the system if your system is already in the LAN network, even if you have VPN on, the VM can still talk to other devices on the network. Other network endpoints are still going to be visible because of ARP, as well as, you know, if you have other services available on your other computers, so that might include things like SMB and whatnot, they're still going to be able to see it if you have a VPN on. Because remember, VPN runs, assuming we're talking about VPN software, it runs inside your guest environment still. And that is something that is not guaranteed to be stable, and is not something guaranteed to be able to block off communications between other computers. Now, one way you can go about create an isolated environment is if you set up a VLAN or even just run it as under a different NAT isolation, NAT layer in general. And if you have that separate network controller hooked up to this VM, and you're super 100% sure that that thing cannot talk to anything else on the network, and if you checked with Wireshark as well, you're 100% sure, and you are able to route that traffic to something else entirely, preferably not your home network. You don't want your home network to be talking to malware. Preferably, what you should do is have that isolated network to communicate directly with things like either Tor or a commercial VPN. So that way, the guest system does not know anything about whether or not it's running behind a VPN or where it's running the thing at, and it doesn't know if the thing it's talking to has other devices on it. That way, you'll be a little bit safer. But if you don't have the confidence or the hardware necessary to set all that up, just don't think about it. Thanks for a hint on that funny Mustang Panda sample on X the other day. Yeah, I recognize you. Hello. All right. Yeah, I was looking at that sample earlier. That was a funny one. Anyways, so now let's move on to VirtualBox. Owned by Oracle, which, you might think Oracle is like the most evil thing. Maybe. It's also free. I don't remember if VirtualBox is FOSS now. But at the very least, it's free as in monetarily free. I don't remember if it's like completely FOSS. Hello, Mecha. VirtualBox has its own VirtualBox is also it also has its own set of problems as well. So if I remember correctly, it doesn't need a guest software to interact with host, but it is still popular enough, and also commonly targeted by anti-VM detection. So the way it's done, if I remember correctly, it is done through BIOS, as well as a few files that are always going to be present. So that includes the system drivers and whatnot. That will always be the case when you're dealing with a Type 2 hypervisor. So same thing with the network. Similar to VMware. Should be... I forgot if it's called host only or what it's called. It's been a while since I last used VirtualBox. Both VMware and VirtualBox also has its own problem as well. So that includes sandbox escaping. Since they're both super popular, they're very commonly targeted by malware developers, and it's been documented multiple times that there have been numerous VMware and VirtualBox sandbox escape techniques out there. Most of them are patched now, but they keep happening, is what I'm saying. So there's that to worry about as well. Commercial license needed for REWorkshop. You use this extension from pack from where I remember. Yeah, that's also another thing. Different licensing. Technically, I think VMware. I forgot if VMware's license also states something similar. It's been a while since I last read the TOS terms of service. So there's that for both. Now, if you're on Windows, you have another option. And this is my preferred solution, but it also has its own problem as well. Hyper-V. I actually think Hyper-V is relatively understated. I personally use Hyper-V a lot of the times, comes with your Windows asterisk because it depends on your Windows edition. Why do I have that PDF pulled up? Oh my god, it's how long has that been on screen? Anyways, so it comes with your Windows, and with an asterisk because it depends on the edition that you have. Home definitely does not. Windows Home definitely does not have Hyper-V enabled, and you can't even enable the virtual machine platform if I remember correctly. So you can't even use things like, I forgot if you can actually, but things like WSL depends on it. Now, if you are on the support version, so that includes Pro Workstation, Education, Enterprise, etc., then you can enable it and turn on or off Windows features section of your system. It's not super popular amongst malware researchers, mainly because it really didn't become mainstream until recent years. But the best thing about Hyper-V is that it's a Type 1 hypervisor. So technically it runs in parallel with your system. And technically when it comes to Hyper-V, the concept of guest and host doesn't exist. It's the concept of root partition and child partition. So the similar terminology will be root partition, some kinda equals to host machine, child partition kinda equals to a child partition. So yeah, the benefits of running as a Type 1 hypervisor is that it runs on top of your machine, and technically there is nothing that needs to be abstracted away. So everything about your hardware except the GPU part is directly available in your system. Now, there are some problems with this. The main problem being a lot of your system configuration is kind of exposed in there as well when you're running as a Type 1 hypervisor. Now, with that being said, you don't need to usually worry about this. Also, things like network adapters, you can set those to bridge to completely different physical hardware, or run as a bridge network as well. But since it runs as a Type 1 hypervisor, it also means that all the communication between the root partition and child partition, it doesn't really need a separate software for that. It is all communicated through something called I forget what the exact term is, but it's basically like Hyper-V has its own socket that uses to communicate between the root partition and child partition. So when you do things like moving things around and whatnot, it doesn't need. If you want a copy paste file, etc., all of that communication is done through the Hyper-V socket. Now that also means, unfortunately, if you want the best experience, you're gonna need the Generation 2 VM on Hyper-V, and that kind of limits you to what OS you can use. I haven't tried Windows 8, but I know it works best on Windows 10 or above for the child partition. So that's another reason why I'm running as Windows 10 on this child partition you're seeing right now. So for things like drag and dropping, okay, technically drag and drop doesn't exist, but copy pasting, adjusting window size at will, and things like that, they're done with something called enhanced session. Basically, when you switch over to enhanced session, it basically establishes an RDP connection between the root partition and child partition, and is done. It does that through. If I remember correctly, it does that through the Hyper-V socket. I'm not entirely sure. Don't quote me on that. But at the very least, it's basically RDP that's running inside the VM Connect that's on your root partition. Now, enhanced session has its own problems. You do leak your host name. I think the name is session name. I forgot. Let me check. Not client name. Oops. Not session name. Client name. Okay. So when you connect from one session to the other in RDP, your client name does leak. So it does tell you. It does tell the client that's being connected. Sorry, the server that's being connected, quote unquote. The server in this case being a child partition. Does create an environment variable on every process is spawned after connection, something called client name, and client name is basically the host name that the client is coming from. So if you're on your host VM, sorry, if you're on your root partition, your root partition's Windows host name is going to leak here. Another thing is, since it runs on top of RDP, things like your RDP bitmap cache is going to be there. Now, this isn't really an issue unless your root partition is compromised by something else. Then in that case, anyone can look at what you've been doing lately on your RDP sessions. This isn't really an issue for researchers or most people, really, because, like, you know, in what scenario is an attacker gonna know, hey, this is a malware researcher, I got into his machine, and now I'm gonna look at his I'm gonna look at their what they've been doing lately. But I figure it's worth mentioning in case you didn't know already. RDP does that. It caches every interaction of yours. It kind of basically periodically takes screenshot kind of deal, and then saves it onto your local system. It is useful for instant response, though. But this isn't really something you need to worry about. I just figured I should mention it here. Same thing with network. I feel like this applies to everything. Except it's not called host only. I think it's called private or internal. Either is fine, but you just said it's private. Now, fortunately, all of these support snapshots of some kind. So, general VM practice: do not connect to the internet unless you know what you're doing. Which most of the time, if you're just getting started, if you're watching this, you probably don't know what you're doing. Or, you know, if you do know what you're doing, you feel free. Now the next thing is you probably also periodically want to look at whether or not check how much of your system. By the way, all VMs can be detected to some degree, so that also includes basically all Type 1 hypervisors, even QEMU, which we're gonna get to in a little bit. Actually, I should probably talk about QEMU real quick before we move on. So QEMU is completely FOSS. It is used to emulate quote unquote emulate. It is basically used to run a lot of different environments. Not even just Linux, Windows, etc., but also used to sometimes unit test things like firmware and whatnot as well. Technically, it should work on Windows, but I never tried QEMU on Windows. You most likely would want to use QEMU on Linux. I think QEMU is technically available on macOS as well. By the way, don't ask me about anything about macOS. I know nothing about macOS. I'm not gonna pretend I do. I'm sure VMware also exists on there. That's the best. That's to the extent of knowledge I know. QEMU, I believe, is also Type 1 hypervisor. Let me check. I don't want to be giving out false information here. Give me a second. Use Parallels for VM on Mac. Yep, I know Parallels is very popular. Now that said, I can't tell you the specifics about Parallel because I've never used it. Or use Mac OS in general. And I kind of wish I do. Unfortunately, I don't have a Mac OS up that I can use at home. No, not you. Get out of here. Technically, there's KVM as well. Oh, okay. QEMU is Type 2. Yeah. KVM, on the other hand, is Type 1. That's what I was thinking of. So a lot of times QEMU is used alongside KVM so that QEMU can use KVM. If I'm going to understand this correctly. Now, there are benefits to using KVM plus QEMU. A lot of popular sandbox sort of services that you see, they're usually built on top of QEMU plus KVM. You might have seen things like Cape, which is a popular sandbox solution that you can use at home. Unfortunately, I think Cape might be... I'm not sure if Cape is still being maintained, but its predecessor was Kaku. Kaku is also built on top of QEMU and KVM. Now, the next generation of Kaku became Triage. Basically, the developers of Kaku went to work on Triage. And you might have seen the name a few times before on various VirtualBox comments. Basically, all of their architectures, they're all built on top of QEMU and KVM. And the reason it's so popular, and a lot of times it's because if you configure it correctly, if you configure your guest correctly on QEMU plus KVM, then a lot of times things can be virtually undetectable. If you're interested in knowing more about that, you can take a look at Cape. Cape runs on top of Kaku, which runs on top of QEMU plus KVM, if I remember correctly. And things like Cape also solves a lot of things that I mentioned earlier. So, including things like connecting the VM to Tor, etc., etc. I would highly encourage you to look into the solution if you are on Linux. That's it, especially if you want to build in an environment where it's like virtually undetectable. There are guides available on Cape that tells you how to do that. So yeah, I personally, so I did set up a Cape environment before, but I haven't used it in a long while because the thing is, you don't really, Cape isn't really meant for research. I'm sorry, Cape really isn't meant for like real time analysis. You can't really do much to interact with the VM while analysis is running because it's like running headless most of the time. You can connect to it, but you might also mess with Cape's auto analysis. But regardless, you can use the same concepts from Cape and then build your own and then start working on your own solution there. I personally haven't done that because it's very, very, very annoying to build and use. That's why I think I built it like 5 years ago. I haven't used it since. I think I've used it for like half a year. Anyways, let's get back to the general VM practice. So you might want to check how much of your system can be detected. Now, I usually wouldn't worry too much about NTVM, like I said before, but it's a good practice to still take a look at run Alkaiser, figure out how much of your things can be detected. It's just a good practice to do anyways. Also, you know, there's things like OPSEC, the network, the system environment checks, etc., etc. Always, you shouldn't assume that just because you're in a VM, you're bulletproof. Malware samples might not like if you're running on a VM. They'll detect it and they'll be like, okay, I'm out of here. And things like that. I kind of forgot to mention, technically, Windows Sandbox is also running on top of Hyper-V. Just it has its own image. Malware is smart enough to do that? Yes, it sure is. So, like, take a look at Alkaiser. Actually, a lot of malware takes their detection logic from Alkaiser, actually. Also, set up a snapshot. Most of the solutions we talked about above, all of them support snapshot of some kind. Basically, it's like whenever you're done with looking at malware, of course, you want to quickly revert it back to the previous state, right? So you could set up a snapshot whenever you feel like it. Especially if you're like, let's say if you're just starting to run a malware, and you're like, okay, here's what's going to do next. I don't know. I'm not sure about the outcome of what's going to do next. So I'm going to do a snapshot here. And then once you've done that and you're like, okay, I want to try the other outcome. And then you can revert back to an earlier state. Now, speaking of setting a snapshot though, I also want to talk about the Windows guest setup. How much you want to do this, kind of depends on whether or not you like to be profiled, or whether or not if you care about being profiled. Because if you do set up a Windows guest, and if you set up your environment too uniquely, then might get, and if you commonly use it to visit certain malware family, then you might get targeted. The threat actor might start to notice your system at some point. And then they might just disconnect immediately, or things like that. So I personally have done quite a bit of tinkering on the systems I built, on the guest systems I built. If you're unsure about setting up your Windows guest, you can also get pre-made solution. So things like Flare, a Flare VM. It's actually been a very long-running project. back when Mandiant was still called FireEye. I think it started off as a FireEye employee wanted to make their own thing, and then they published under FireEye, and then FireEye became Mandiant, so now it's under Mandiant. I don't know how much of Flare is still being maintained. I think it is still maintained decently well. If you go to okay, good to know. I just remember the URL. Okay, yeah, it's still being maintained. Now there is a problem with Flare. By default, Flare is like very heavy because it comes bundled with a bunch of things. A bunch of popular analysis software, IDA, etc., IDA free, etc. But if you're just starting off, I think Flare VM is a fine place to start off of. Now, eventually, you might want to move on to building your own environment because, like I said, Flare VM is very, very big. Things like that will depend wildly on how much of the system you want to be prepared for you. Because down the line, as you use more and more of the tools, you're going to realize, oh, I'm really only going to be using like dozens of tools. Instead of like 5 dozens that's available on Flare VM. I think there's more than that actually. Do you know any VM that can run on macOS? Doge, I just said I don't know anything about macOS. I can't really help you there. Now, so there's that. Now, as for things you want to tinker with, basically install all the popular analysis stuff, but also, you might also want to take a look at the various anti-VM techniques that a lot of people use, and then try to counter those. So a lot of times they'll detect things like system names, usernames, host names. They'll compare them against a set of hard-coded lists. You might want to avoid ones that are in that list. You might also want to, for example, move IDA or other analysis software around, because a lot of times they'll also look for files on the system and be like, okay, why is this in program files, etc., etc. Also, they're going to take a look at hardware configuration, so that includes things like RAM. How much of RAM did you allocate to this VM? Is it like under 4 gigabytes? If it is, then, well, most people don't have 4 gigabytes of RAM these days. Sometimes they might even check for 8 gigabytes. Now, with that being said, I think 8 gigabytes is like the minimum for most people. A lot of times they do these checks. Knowing the malware researcher probably doesn't have a whole lot of hardware resource available on their system, and they don't want the VM to be the predominant thing running on their system. But I think the easiest way to counter that would be just set the guest VM memory usage, available RAM, to be as high as possible. Now, if you can't do that, then you might need to resort to manually bypassing those checks. What else? I think that might be all I want to talk about. I should probably sit for a quick, actually. So, after like 40 minutes, we're finally done talking about VM. Now, there is a lot more to this. There's a lot more nuance to what I'm talking about here as well. So don't take this as a 100% this is the guide that you should use. Especially as you do more and more malware analysis, you're going to figure out, hey, this method doesn't really work. I need to change my system accordingly. And then eventually you're going to work out your own setup that'll work best for you and work best for various malware. Okay, now let's talk about tools on your guest system. So there are a few tools that I like to recommend. So let's talk about the basics first. So we're gonna need a disassembler. Normally VMs only support the architecture they're running on, so to run macOS and VM, easiest way is to run VM on that Mac. So you want to run the latest macOS on. Yeah, that's another thing that so that's another thing that's been kind of iffy lately for me when it comes to getting a macOS set up. It's most things run on the Apple chip these days, and some of them don't. I don't know how well x86-64 VMs work on there. Anyways, yeah. If you want to learn more about macOS things and their VMs, I'd highly recommend looking up on your own, because I can't really tell you more than what I already do know, and that what I already do know is very little. No clue I'm at the limit of my Mac knowledge? Yeah. I think that's, well, for most malware research, actually. Unless you're like unless they're like super into the macOS ecosystem. And alongside their malware family, a lot of times you can only make basic assumptions. I want to switch to a different soundtrack real quick, because this soundtrack is running to an end. Where's the ZZZ? You know, good point. There we go. Okay, so now let's talk about the tools. So naturally, you want a disassembler that goes along with your... I should probably disable this. You don't really need this running right now. So you want a disassembler that you can use to actually figure out what the assembly looks like for the malware. Well, we'll get to that in a little bit, but I'm just gonna leave that there. I'll come back to this. So aside from disassembler, you might also want a debugger to go along with it. Now, what debugger you might want to use highly depends on where you're looking at. We'll get to that in a little bit. You know, there are other things that can make your life a little bit easier. So System Internal Suites, I think that is the most basic thing that almost every malware researcher should have on their system. Not even just malware researchers. If you're an IT pro, you might also want to have System Internal Suites lying around. I can barely hear myself. Let me turn this down for myself. Okay. So System Internal Suites, what is it? It's basically it started off as a set of software that was developed by a Microsoft employee. Sorry, that was developed by an individual, and then that system suite was later acquired by Microsoft. So if you go look for System Internal Suites now, you'll see that it's actually hosted under Microsoft Docs or Microsoft Learn. If we open up System Internals, you'll see that it comes with a bunch of software. And the main few things you might want to learn. By the way, for today's introductory course, we're not really going to delve too much into everything, but like a little bit of everything. It's more or less just to get you started. But the main ones you want to look out for are Process Monitor and maybe Process Explorer. I'm gonna get into those in depth a little bit later. But for now, just know that these two are probably the most common ones you'll be using. There are other things you should familiarize yourself with. So things like psexec, handle, what else? pslist, tcpview, etc., etc. You might want to play around with those, regardless of whether or not you're going to be using those, because a lot of these system internal suites tools, they're actually fairly useful for not just you, but also malware developers. Like, for example, psexec is often used to do a quick little elevated process starting, etc., etc. Other tools you might want to get. So this isn't really in most people's arsenal, but I think everything is in general is good to have, because this is everything. It basically shows you, well, everything that is on your local system. As a sorry to distract you, but can I get a Go Birds for good luck? Go Birds, woo! I have no idea who that is, but sure. Anyways, everything shows you everything that is in the system, specifically the ones with NTFS partition. So it really does help you to quickly find whatever's been changed on your system, especially sorted by day modified or day created. As you can see, when I open up sysinternals, it also created a link in the recent path, right? Recent folder. And you'll be able to find changes like this very quickly with everything enabled, running. And it's good not only for this type of purpose, but also because you might also find this useful on your own host system as well. Just so you can find items you're looking for very quickly. So for example, if I want to look for x64 debug, I can just like x64 debug.exe or wfn program files. WFN stands for whole file name. There's a lot you can learn from this. You can use the search syntax here to figure out. So that's not only useful for your typical day-to-day things, but also, in this case, your analysis environment as well. Let's see what else. You might also want to get common every day-to-day software installed. So things like Office, I wouldn't recommend installing the latest version. I would recommend something a little bit older, but not too old. Maybe Office 2019 or above, 2016, 2019. If you want, you can run 365 if you wanted, but I would recommend something a little bit older. That way they also ensure that you don't have the security patches installed as well. That way, if you want to test some older vulnerabilities or even undays, they can try them in this environment. Now, I also there's something I forgot to mention during the setup phase. I think I should probably also mention this real quick. Windows. The type of Windows edition you use doesn't really matter, but I'd recommend something a little bit lighter, things you can tinker with. So technically you can install TSC if you wanted. This does make things a little bit lighter on Resource Hog, but that might not always be preferable, because sometimes the attacker will be like, hey, what is this LTSC looking environment thing doing in my list of clients? They're gonna want to investigate, and as soon as they start investigating, they're gonna be like, okay, wow, this is probably a test system. So you can use things like Pro if you wanted. Now, if that being said, Windows 10 or 11 professional is going to be very bloated, which may or may not be a good thing depending on how you look at it. If you use professional, there's probably going to be a lot of background traffic going around, especially when you're using Wireshark. Now, with that being said, you could probably write your own script and stop those, or run debug script and whatnot. So yeah, there's that. You can also run Enterprise if you want it as well. Regardless of what you choose, though, I actually don't think the edition matters too much for the most part. But there's one very important thing you need to deal with. And that is Defender. Defender, unfortunately, is enabled. Well, fortunately, for most people, actually. Fortunately, is enabled for everyone if you're on Windows 10 or above. Now, if you're a malware researcher, that's an unfortunate thing for you, because it means they're going to start flagging malware as soon as you drop it in your system. So you might want to disable it on your guest system. There is something called Defender Control that you can use. I'm going to use Duck for this. Oh, wait. Oops. There are a bunch of software that you can use to... Oh, holy shit, what is up with all this ad? You can use to disable Defender. Now, Defender Control is a little bit old already. It really only works best on Windows 10. I don't know how well it works on 11. I don't think it very, actually. You may need to look into other solutions, but in general, basically, you want to disable Defender for the most part. Now, if you want to keep Defender around, just in case, then there's two things at the bare minimum that I want you to turn off. Let me see if I can find a screenshot of this on the internet. Now, this is in general is a good thing to be turning off, even on your host system. I'll look for images. Okay, this image is perfect. Two things I want to turn off: cloud-based protection and automatic sample submission. So basically, as the name suggests, your sample will be automatically sent to Microsoft for further analysis if it thinks it's a malware. And that alongside cloud-based protection, cloud-based protection, don't really know exactly how it works, but it's gonna be something similar to checking whether or not this thing matches anything on their cloud-based backend. Usually I wouldn't recommend turning these two off. The main thing being automatic sample submission. If you're a malware researcher, you probably don't want to share that sample with everyone just because you're running on a Windows system. The automatic sample submission will get the suspicious files sent to Microsoft, and if you're dealing with an Amber or higher sample, TLP Amber or Red even, your sample might get sent to Microsoft. So turn those off. Preferably turn those off with registry tweaks instead, because if you don't do that, then it's going to continue nagging you about these being turned off. But if you turn it off in registry, then it's going to stay off and it won't nag you about it. This is more or less a paranoia thing, but this is a secondhand piece of information, but we have heard where early zero-day information got leaked to Microsoft because of these two toggles. I don't know how real this piece of information is, but that's just from what I've heard. Regardless, though, you should probably turn those off anyways, just in case. turn off Defender. Now back to common everyday software. You might also want to throw in some extra stuff as well. So like, you might want to keep Discord, Steam, etc., especially if you're dealing with InfoStealer. Now you don't really need to log into either of these, but sometimes it's good to have these software just laying around. It also lowers the suspicion of the attacker if they do come into your system. If you install a bunch of other crap on that's normally not present in a research environment. Now specifically for InfoStealer, you can sometimes put these in here just to see if InfoStealer does anything to those directories and or files. Especially for Discord and Steam, because those two are like the most commonly targeted. Also, I would recommend. Actually, I think this is less of a tool thing, more of a Windows thing. Put this down here. And I would also probably clean up your. I wouldn't say clean up, but like take a look at your desktop. Like, does it have anything that might scream that you're a researcher? Do you have x64 debug? Do you have IDA on your desktop? I know that sounds really weird, but a lot of times attackers will come into your system and then they'll take a look at the desktop. That's actually something that's super common. They'll take a look at your desktop, they'll take a look at your documents folder, etc., and they'll check if it has anything that they're interested in. Not necessarily because they think you're a researcher, but you know, more or less the initial recon. If you have your setups set up in a way that is somewhat convincing, then at the very least they'll be more incentivized to stay on your system for a little bit longer, because you might want to study what the actor does on your computer as well. I would recommend putting down some decoy or fake documents on the desktop documents downloads folder. These are like the most common places where they're gonna check to see if there's anything they might be interested in. You can put in a bunch of fake document names that they might be interested in. For example, maybe I'm pretending to be like a office worker or something. I'll put down some invoice documents or whatever. Things like that. I think for tools, that's generally it. Oh yeah, you might want to also install Python on there. This is a personal taste type of thing. But sometimes you'll want to write scripts, extractors, etc. You might want Python installed, or IDs, or VS Visual Studio. This is a personal preference. Whatever you install is completely up to you. Highly optional. The reason I put Visual Studio on there is because sometimes you might want to compile and run malware that might be on GitHub, things like that. Also, at the same time, having Python or things like Node.js, npm, Node, etc., you might want to also keep those installed just in case, because there are some malware cases where they might be used. Specifically, what I'm thinking of is the ones Lazarus use, or at least Lazarus adjacent. You know, the crypto ones. The ones that are after crypto, like not necessarily Lazarus, but like, you know what I'm saying. I'm not going to delve too much into Lazarus right now, but I'm just saying like there is a Lazarus adjacent group that particularly likes to use crypto and likes to target software developers, and they use Node the most to do the initial access. And you might want to keep that around just in case you need to run something like that. What else? I think that's it, really. Okay, now let's get into a disassembler. Now, disassembler, this will always be a heated topic amongst researchers. Some like completely free and open source solutions. Some prefer their expensive proprietary solutions. I'm just gonna name some, and then you can decide which one you want to use. All right. So first one, Ghidra, released by NSA. I think it was back in 2016, 2014. Is like the most popular thing people use these days because it's completely FOSS. Because you can take a look at it right now on GitHub. Unfortunately, it's Java based. That's one reason I kind of don't like it, because this runs on top of Java. But Ghidra is like super popular. It's like used by most people these days, especially if they're starting off and if they don't have access to certain software, certain proprietary software. Ghidra has its own benefits and problems as well. So the benefit being it's completely FOSS, so that there are tons of stuff being developed for it all the time. There are even stuff that uses Ghidra as a base as well. Like, for example, Cutter uses the Ghidra disassembler engine, I believe. Sorry, the decompiler engine from Ghidra. So yeah, give Ghidra a try if you're not sure. Now, personally though, I'm more of an IDA person, so IDA stands for Interactive Disassembler. Now this is a paid proprietary. There is technically a free version. Actually, Hexrace has gotten a lot better in terms of pricing. I know a lot of people still think IDA is very expensive. It kind of is, but like it's not super bad anymore. People used to think IDA costs like thousands of dollars. That is technically still the case, but it's not as bad these days. If you take a look at the various pricing. So for individual non-commercial use, there is IDA free. IDA free used to not come with any decompilers, but nowadays IDA free actually has its own x86 64 decompiler that you can use with an asterisk, because it's a cloud-based decompiler, meaning you're technically sending some of the information back to a cloud server and then have them process it there and then send it back to you, which may or may not be preferable. You might care about it, you might not. But there's that, if you really want to give it a try. Now there's also IDA Home. IDA Home was only recently introduced like a few years ago. So IDA Home is, I would actually recommend getting this if you are starting off. I would say €35 per year is actually not that bad. It's like the $30 a month or something like that. Sounds expensive, but what you get out of it is a lot more decent than free. It does come with your own local disassembler of your choice. To cloud-based decompiler, unfortunately, that's still the same thing. You don't get your local decompilers, but you do get access to things like IDA Python and scripting. You also get a debugger. You also get different OS support as well. So there's that. But the one people use the most is probably IDA Pro. IDA Pro is like different tiers now, but like in general, basically it comes with the most common ones you're gonna see are the x86-64 and ARM decompilers. Basically, when you use IDA Pro, you can drop in those files and they can spit out the decompiled results, the decompiled pseudocode for you, depending on the bundle that you got. Now these are the expensive ones. To be fair, you probably would never buy these up by yourself. If you're an employed personnel, your company will just buy this for you, and you get access to IDA. Now, with that being said, it looks expensive, and it is. You're probably not going to be buying this on your own. But you know, realistically, you're probably only going to be using Expert 2 for the most part. You get 2 local decompilers, A6, you can pick from any of these. Now, technically, you can get the Ultimate Bundle or even something higher, like 4 or 6. Usually, you don't need to go that far unless you're like at a decently large firm where you'll actually be looking across this many different architectures, which a lot of times you really aren't going to be, because like most of the time you're going to be looking at A664 malware most of the time anyways. If you are working at a decently large cybersecurity firm, you might need to look at ARM and MIPS as well. Like we do look at MIPS and ARM at work, but you know, it's not something you run into daily. That's what I'm saying. So realistically, you're only really going to need this plan. Now, with that being said, realistically, if you're starting off, your copy of IDA might have fallen off from the back of a truck somewhere. That's fine, as long as you're, you know, you're an individual working, just tinkering around. I'm not going to say anything about that. But that's, yeah, something that might be a venue as well. The next up would be Binary Ninja. Binary Ninja has gotten super good apparently. It is also paid and proprietary, but is relatively affordable from what I remember. So we go to Binary Ninja's website right now. So I have a friend that uses Binary Ninja. They used to be a hardcore IDA user. They actually moved over to Binary Ninja. A few years ago, Binary Ninja's decompiler support was not very good. It was basically an experimental state, but now it's gotten pretty decent from what I've heard. Now, I've not tried Binary Ninja in a long while, so I don't know how well it holds up these days, but its pricing is actually fairly decent, I would say. So personal starts at $300 a year. No, actually, is it a year? Yeah, I think it's a year per year. But you get a lot of things out of Personal Edition already. And the decompilation architecture, this is plenty enough. Like, this is way more than what IDA does at the same price. So Binary Ninja is realistically a more viable competitor against Hexrace. So I would recommend, if you're just starting off, you might want to give Binary Ninja a try, and there is a student discount as well. If you are a student, you can get the student discount license from them. Now, technically, there is Cutter as well. Cutter was initially going to be Radar 2's spiritual successor, but I couldn't really find sources on that. I've heard that from somewhere, I don't know. But either way, Cutter they have their own disassembly engine, but it uses the Ghidra decompiler engine by default. The renewal fee for Binja is half the cost if you want to keep getting updates. Yeah, I think for IDA, it's basically the same rate every year. I think. Don't quote me on that because I'm not the one buying our licenses. But yeah. Look into all of these solutions, find whatever you find works best for you, and see if that see whichever you like. Now, personally, I like IDA. I have been using IDA since I want to say 7.2 or earlier. So it's actually, I haven't been using IDA for that long. It's more like 5 years-ish, which isn't really that long compared to how long IDA has been around. But I write plugins for it. I maintain plugins for it. I have submitted numerous plugin PRs to various ones that are available on GitHub, things like that. Either subscription based at those prices on site. Yeah, that part I know. I just don't know how much renewal costs. That's a solid product. It is. And I think if you do pay for it, I think you'll find that it's very good at what it does, especially the compilation aspect. Like on top of the scriptability, especially now that IPython actually has a decent documentation now. It used to be pretty bad before 9. And it's starting to support a lot more things as well. Like they finally switched over to Qt6. Anyways, try all of them, figure out what's best for you, and go from there. Now for debugger, it kind of depends wildly depending on what you're looking at. For the most part, x64 debug will do you just fine. It's this little spider thing down here. You can't see it, but you only pull it up. It's this thing here. x64 debug. It says x32 because this is a 32-bit version. It's used by many developers. It's also used by most malware researchers. Since you can step through all the software that you'll open in here and work from there. It supports a bunch of neat features like command and scriptability, things like that. We'll get into Disassembler, Debugger, and all these interactions in just a little bit. But yeah, just know that x64 debug is like the standard go-to. Now, depending on what you're looking at, you might sometimes want to look at things a little bit deeper. Hell, if you're dealing with kernel mode stuff, you might also definitely want this around. It's WinDebug, WinDBG, whatever you want to call it. This is the official debugger from Microsoft. You might typically most want to use this when you're dealing with something that requires a much lower level of investigation and or kernel mode level driver. Now, for the most part, you're probably not going to be using WinDebug for the most part, but if you do, you can grab it from the Microsoft Store. Or actually, there is a different mirror, a separate mirror. I think that's on GitHub. And you can go take a look at, and it gives you the latest version of WinDebug. I don't have it on this computer apparently. WinDebug is its own rabbit hole to go down of because it's actually not the easiest thing to use, especially the command names are like a bunch of one words, one characters. Hopefully you'll never need to use WinDebug. Well, I think we're gonna follow Sam. But yes, aside from that, let's also talk about non-standard assembly stuff, which is you're probably gonna want to keep the NSpy around. This is for looking at .NET related stuff. Hello. Neural Wave. It's another Neural viewer. Okay. The NSpy is really meant for looking at .NET malware, and technically it's DNSpy X now because the original developer for DNSpy has left has stopped development of the original DNSpy. So you do want to grab it now. The fork that is still being maintained is called DNSpy X. DNSpy is basically, it does a lot of the anti-debugging stuff for you already. And if you're starting off, I actually don't think .NET malware is like the worst thing you can look at, since DNSpy does convert the ILL back into readable C# code by default. You can look at ILL, of course, intermediate language, but if you're starting off, I think that would be a good place to start off, especially if you're looking at known malware like async-rat, things like that. Speaking of which samples you want to look at, I'll get to that in a little bit as well. But yeah, DNSpy, WinDebug, x64 debug, get those installed. Also, technically, some of these disassemblers above, they do come with their own debuggers. Whether or not you want to use them is also up to you. Like technically, IDA has its own debugger as well. So if you want to use it in there, you can do that. I think Binary Ninja has its own as well. Ghidra has its own as well, I think. Cutter definitely does, especially if you're looking at samples on Linux. I've been going lightning round talk for like 70 minutes now. Actually, I think I should probably take a break. Sit tight. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in chat, and I'll be right back. A 2-minute break-ish. Okay, I've got some cough drops. Hopefully that'll help me buff through this tough through this entire thing. Thank you for follow. 0 horsepower. Welcome. How would you get into malware analysis if you had to start from scratch? So, this is kind of what this entire stream is about thus far, including the initial setup and the tools you need to get. Now, what I'm about to start talking about is what I would say to most people that are starting off, and that is where do you find samples to look at, and how do you actually go about learning how things work, etc., etc. So, actually, to start off, there are a few places I like to go. Before I start talking about where to get malware samples, you can actually, if you know of a few malware that you might run into, or you might suspect that this is a malware, you can already start taking a look at those samples already. Like if you think whatever you're about to run is suspicious, then start looking inside the VM. Start doing dynamic analysis, start doing behavior analysis, etc., etc. As for how you should go about doing those, we'll get to that in a little bit. But aside from that, if you don't know where to start, if you don't know where to get malware samples, the most popular place these days will be abuse.ch. This will be basically a ground for where most malware situates. Please select all fish. That's a fish, I think. There we go. Now this is kind of where many of the malware would be. Now the problem with Malware Bazaar is that most of the malware you see on here, their quality depends highly vary. Sometimes you'll see very popular botnet stuff, which doesn't really have much to look at. Sometimes you'll see very, very complicated malware with a bunch of loaders intertwined between them, including different shellcode, injections, etc., etc. So it kind of vary depending on where you're looking at. So abuse.ch is a great place to start. Oh, thank you for follow. Now, aside from abuse.ch, another place I would recommend for threat hunting would be on Twitter, of all places. Yes, Twitter is actually a good place to do threat hunting. Technically, you can hop on Mastodon as well for infosec.exchange, Blue Sky maybe as well. But Twitter will be where most of the popular researchers share their findings. You'll find hashes, you'll find ILCs, you'll find domains, IPs, infrastructures, etc., etc. Now, usually, if they are working independently or if they're working with a company that doesn't mind sharing its info, a lot of times these people will tweet out their own findings. Sometimes they'll even upload the sample up to abuse.ch. And I think that's a great place to start as well, because if you're coming from a tweet, you probably already know the context of this malware. If it's on abuse.ch, you can then follow up from there. I'm like, okay, I think I roughly know what to expect based on this tweet. And then you can go to abuse.ch and download the malware. Now, another place to go to, of course, would be VX Underground. I'm sure Smelly is like proud of this non-sponsored segment. VX Underground, they have their own pool of samples as well. A lot of them are coming from various different sources. Some of them from VirusTotal, some of them from abuse.ch, some of them submitted by fans of the website, etc., etc. That is on their, I think, virus.exchange site. Now, aside from that, VXUG also has their own sample pool that's like selected from a bunch of papers and whatnot. Speaking of papers, VX Underground also has a bunch of papers that you can read into. A lot of them from various conferences, a lot of them from various blogs, etc., etc. If you're starting off, the type of malware I would recommend looking into would actually be the ones from APT groups, because despite the advanced persistent threat name, you might think they make the most advanced malware there is. Lots of injections, lots of kernel mode driver, lots of very complicated obfuscations. But that's not necessarily the case, depending on the group. Just because they're called APT doesn't necessarily mean they're quote-unquote advanced. A lot of times it's more like the persistent part. That's why people group them under APT. And also, just for the sake of explaining this term, APT also doesn't mean state-sponsored. You have to keep that in mind as well. But if you look into various threat groups and their malware family, a lot of times you'll actually find simple stuff. Like sometimes they'll use existing red teaming tools. Sometimes they'll use CoboStrike. Sometimes they'll use async rat. Sometimes they'll use Corsair rat, which is basically the predecessor of async rat. Sometimes they'll use Ghost. And Ghost is like super popular as well amongst Chinese malware developers. Things like that. So look into APT groups, look into the various malware they use. You might be decently surprised by sometimes how simple their malware is. And aside from those, yeah, I think those will be it. If you want to look for places to look for samples and whatnot. I need to check if there are a few samples I'll look at today for demonstration. There is one good candidate that's like very simple, but it needs to be white. I don't know if it is white. By the way, whenever you, that's another term I should probably explain. Whenever you hear me say white, green, amber, red, this is what I'm referring to, the traffic light protocol that is published by CISA. There's TOP red, there's TOP amber, there's TOP green, there's TOP clear. Clear, which is, whenever you see clear, it refers to version 2 of the TOP protocol. TOP white is like V1. I'm still kind of stuck on the V1 terminology because it's really not that different. It's just the added amber strict, and clear is now called, white is now called clear. Let me explain this briefly before I start looking for the samples. So there's TOP clear, which is, you can share this with anyone. You can share this piece of information or sample of anyone you wanted. TOP green, it's limited disclosure, restricted to community. So the community, in this sense, the quote-unquote community part is a little bit blurred, the definition of this, but generally refers to people that have access to certain resources. So typically when we refer to TOP green, we're referring to the malware researcher community at large. Sometimes this might include places that have their a decent set of sample sizes that is only limited to certain sets of individuals or groups. Like for example, VirusTotal. VirusTotal is something that's considered TOP green because its sample pool is limited, not to everyone, but to a set of paying users or individuals or corporations, typically corporations, because VirusTotal fees are very expensive. So these are considered green. TOP amber and amber strict is limited to limited disclosure and restricted to participants' organization and maybe its clients. Amber strict is so amber strict, let's say you have a slide, right? You only want to show it to like this particular client or this particular organization. And amber refers to information that is shared to both the organization and the clients. Amber strict is when you just limit it to participants' organization. That's it. And that is generally the case of what I do at work. That is also why I can only share a very limited amount of information online, including ILCs. If you are working for a company, your company may have a different definition and policy for what you can or cannot share. For me, I can't share most of the APT samples with any of you. I can't share any of the sensitive ILCs that might be out there. Like, for example, the C2 address, the domain, the IP address, etc., etc. I can't really tell you any of that because I operate under TLP Amber strict for the most part. Now, that is unless the sample has been uploaded to white or clear place, which in this case would be abuse.ch. Technically, virus.exchange should be considered green because it's limited to registered members only, I think. You have to have an account to access it, I think. Don't quote me on that. But that's technically green, but it's more like white than green because of how accessible it is. It's not like the registration is barred off. And then there's TLP Red. TLP Red, it's not for disclosure. You cannot share this with anyone. It should be limited to as few members as possible. For example, you might have a piece of information about a C2 infrastructure, and you don't want others to know about it. And is something that is usually a need-to-know basis. If you don't need to know this information, you probably shouldn't know it. You probably shouldn't learn from it. Probably should not even know that exists. Well, SCP. And TLP Red is best done when it's done in a verbal form, where none of the written materials is left accessible anywhere. This is the type of things that's considered classified, basically. Now, back to what I was saying. There is a sample I kind of want to look at, but only if it's white. So let's see if this is. I'm going to need to hide this real quick. I need to switch over to a different mode. Give me a second. Yes, okay, it is white. Excellent. Okay, so this was a popular sample I tweeted about not too long ago. Actually, I didn't even realize there was a tweet for it until I looked it up. Until I looked up the hash on Twitter. This is a APT sample from a stamp panda. I tweeted about it briefly a few days ago, and thankfully it is on abuse.ch. That means it's a white sample. We can actually look at it today. By the way, OPSEC time. If you ever want to interact with a sample, make sure that it is encrypted in a container. So this might be a zip, this might be a RAR, might be a tar, etc., etc. As long as it's password protected, preferably with the extension name stripped out. This is optional, but I would recommend you do that. So what do I mean by this? So let's say if I have a sample that's considered malicious, right? If I want to move this piece of sample out of the child partition or guest, I would usually rename this and remove the extension so that it doesn't automatically get opened when you accidentally click on it. That way you don't accidentally detonate something. And then what you want to do is you want to also password protected. And typically the most common one you'll see is infected. But you can use whatever, as long as its purpose is mainly to obscure the thing from being accidentally triggered. So let's see, if you want to open this, you can't just double click on it because you have to enter a password. And this also helps prevent it from being scanned by various malware anti-malware engines. So protection upon protection. Also, thank you for the follow. Rami, hello. In fact, there's something I didn't know. So that is the default password for everything on VX Underground. I'm sure Smelly loves getting the question of what's the password. He gets asked that a lot apparently. But yes, infect is like the basic go-to password most people use. I might make white t-shirts about that. I'm not sure about that, but sure. So infected as well here, as you can see, zip password infected. And it doesn't, Malware doesn't keep the original file name. It's not guaranteed to be on here because a lot of Malware wants you to upload the samples in the original file name. But that's also not always guaranteed. But in this case, we do know it's called this without the double zip. So move this over here. Actually, I'm gonna move this in here. So this is the sample we were given. What can we learn from this? So so what you're about to see right now is what goes through my head as a threat intelligence researcher. Not necessarily from just the malware research perspective, but also like the bigger picture of what's to be expected and why this thing was given out to the victim and who might the victim be. In this case, it is saying US now deciding what's next for Venezuela. And what's the context we can get from this file name? So first of all, we know whoever the recipient is, they might be interested in whatever is happening between US and Venezuela. And what has happened between US and Venezuela in the last bit of while? Well, we know US took over Venezuela, right? That happened just a few days ago, or just a few weeks ago, actually a week or two ago, like at the beginning of 2026. And because of that, we can also assume, hey, this is the sample that is probably sent at the beginning of 2026 because this occurred possibly after the takeover. So let's write down what we've learned thus far. Recipient, however you spell it, receiver might be interested in knowing what's happened. Can I turn on word wrapping, please? There we go. What's the country code name for Venezuela? VZ? I'm just gonna say VZ. Incident likely occurred after the conflict. So early 2026. Now, another thing we can learn from it is I forgot if like XF tool does show anything interesting here. Oh, I don't have the XF tool anyways. For zip specifically, you'll always see things at the bare minimum. You'll see things like the last modification date. So you can use 7-zip for this, and it'll tell you what the last file that got modified was dated at. In this case is 2016, January 2nd. And I think this might actually be the last modified date for this for the last file. So I think packed is not the correct term. Latest modified date will be the more correct term. You say 2016? I think I said 2026. Anyways, extract. Now another thing you also want to be wary of. Try not to extract anything on your host machine. In this case, the zip file. Some people might be tempted to just right-click, extract, and then copy-paste this folder into the into your test environment. not the smartest idea because you don't know if there's going to be a vulnerability with the archiving software that you're using. You might accidentally detonate something else that's not the malware inside. You might accidentally detonate something else instead that is in the zip payload. So for example, you might accidentally create a shortcut. Like there are a few recent 7-zip ones. I think some of them are like junction links related. I think one will allow the attacker to do arbitrary writes to any path they wanted. And if you accidentally did unzip this on your host machine, then you might get hit by that. So always be wary of when dealing with samples in general. If you're unsure, just do whatever you need to inside the VM. As you can see, we have one file. It's called the guy from Venezuela to be taken to New York. And you might be like, oh, this is the malware itself, isn't it? It's 84 kilobytes. Surely this is the malware itself. So let's take a look back at the 7-zip output here. You'll see that, hey, not only is there a exe file, there's actually a DLL file as well. It is marked with read-only hidden system. So when you extract this file, 7-zip by default, and most zip software in general, they do keep the original attributes. Now, you might be like, okay, where's the DLL then? Well, I don't see it. Even if you have hidden item turned on, you might not see it because it has the system attribute applied as well. So you need to disable hide protected system files. Now it's there. As you can see, it's a 338 kilobyte file. Now, how do I know that this isn't the malware itself if I hadn't seen this file? Well, another thing you can do is you can check to see if this is a malicious launcher. There are a few indicators. First of all, you can check whether or not if this is digitally signed. If this is digitally signed, then it's likely, I can only say likely, that this is a launcher that will be sideloading a DLL from the side, and that this is not the actual malware itself. And so if you look at it in IDA, you're not going to see anything too interesting. And usually if the digital signature checks out, then usually it is the benign one. So this is not the actual malware itself. Now, another way you can check is to check if the hashes actually match anything on VirtualBox. Now, another method, of course, will be open in IDA and see if it works out, to see if there's anything suspicious. So we check here, you'll see that, okay, and it has the same file name that we just saw. That means someone else uploaded this exe directly onto VirusTotal. You'll see that digital signature checks out, and you'll see that it was signed 2021. That's very far from what when the zip is actually created. And you'll see that the first submission was like 2021. That is also very far from where we currently are. So it's very unlikely this is the actual malware itself based on this alone. And what is happening is it basically is importing the DLL at runtime. As you can see from the exe import, it doesn't reference that DLL name in here. So that means it's probably doing that at runtime. And the DLL hijacking, yes. Settling hijacking, technically different, but a lot of times you'll see them used interchangeably. Technically not the same thing though. Anyways, so when you see a DLL next to it like that, it probably means that it's going to import this particular DLL, especially if it hides it from you, right? So what we can do now is, remember when we mentioned all of these tools earlier? The first thing you can do is, well, first of all, I'm going to disconnect it from the network. So I want to connect to C2 actually. So the first thing I might do, I might open up Process Monitor. Now, what is Process Monitor? We haven't gotten into the specific tools yet, so let's talk about Process Monitor real quick. So Process Monitor, as the name suggests, it monitors the processes. And you'll see that as soon as you started, you're going to see a bunch of these things just flying about. And you'll see there's a very large number counting up at the bottom left there. Like Task Manager on roids? Not quite. Task Manager tells you every processes and what they're like, but it doesn't tell you the exact details on what specific processes are. So, what they're actually doing will be logged by Process Monitor. So that includes things like file operation, registry operations, and whether or not it spawns more process. You can see the process tree by hitting Control T or by using this tree icon here. And let's say there is a particular malware that we'll look at, and I can just right click it and add process to include filter. That way it will remove all the other ones that you're possibly not interested in. So, we will now run this, but before that, I'm going to make a checkpoint. Got a SHA-256 for a sample? Sure. Some abuse.ch. Now, what we'll do is we'll set to clear, and then we'll click on capture, and then we'll run this. And it says, hey, the Word document is corrupted. Please restart the computer again, or contact the original author. Okay? And at this rate, you'll be like, okay, is the malware running now? We'll get into this tool in a little bit, but as you can see, it's not in the process tree right now. Okay, so what happened? So without opening IDA, we can already observe a few things from Process Monitor alone. So first of all, let's limit it to just the exe that we opened. We can remove the WR fault actually. Don't need that right now. You can go into filter. Okay. So as you can see, it's done a lot of things. You might be like, oh, wow, this malware must do a whole lot then. No, that is not the case, because when you use Process Monitor, it's going to show you a bunch of things that any process will do. That's due to the process image loader from Windows and a lot of other things Windows does in the background whenever a process is started. So not necessarily everything you see here is done intentionally by the malware developer, but we can limit it to things like, okay, let's see if it does anything interesting by taking a look at file and registry summary. So we can take a look at file summary first. I might be interested in to see if it reads any file. You can sort by read bytes, read bytes, technically in past tense, current, whatever. It opens up both of these files, okay. But the rest seems to be normal Windows DLLs libraries. Okay, now we take a look at write bytes. As you can see, there are two new paths. There's one under C program data technology 360 MB, and now you can see that it wrote two files under this directory. And then shortly after that, they seem to have exited. Because if we take a look at the process tree again, you'll see that it only survived for a little bit. Now, we can also observe this change. We can also observe this file by taking a look at everything. As you can see, when we sort by date created, it's created these two files at this path. So that way you can quickly navigate to it without having to manually navigate it based on the path here. That was in the file summary. Now, how do we know if it's done anything else? Also, let's take a look at the registry summary real quick. This time I'm also interested in to see what it wrote. You might be like, okay, so what do some of these registry keys mean? And are they anything that might be relevant to me? A lot of times, as you look at more and more samples, you'll realize, hey, a lot of them are the same, because once again, a lot of these are handled by are created and caused by the image loader and the thing in Windows. And in this case, there is one particular registry key that's hidden in here. As you can see, it's created a registry key under HKCU software, Microsoft Windows current version run, and it's created this registry key, registry value called Light360. And whenever you're looking for persistence, this is one of the paths to look for. You want to look for anything that's under a run registry key. Now, what does persistence mean? It means whenever you restart the computer now, this registry key is looked after by Windows, and it'll be like, okay, there's a list of software I need to run. Here's a list of all of them, and one of them is this Light360 thing. Now we can also take a look at auto runs, which is part of the system control suites once again, and they'll tell you everything that will start automatically that it knows of, from a method that it knows of, and they'll see if anything interesting is in here. Now in this case, you can see that the Light360 is here, and as you can see that it starts this exe that was moved to that folder earlier with a -- data in uppercase. Back to auto runs for a little bit, you'll see that as you scroll down, you'll sometimes see things that are marked as yellow, sometimes you'll see things marked as red. Now, what do these mean? So, red is typically when a file isn't, its identity cannot be verified. It doesn't have a verified signature. So, you'll see this parentheses, not verified, next to the publisher. For example, we can see that this particular driver does not have a verified signature, and therefore should not be trusted. And that's why it highlights it for us in red. Sometimes you'll see yellow ones as well. Yellow means it cannot find the file. And yellow is probably not a good sign, because that means anything, if the malware has access to this path, then it can just write the write the malware in there, and that way it'll be automatically open next time. Anyways, back to this though. As you can see that next time we log into this user account, then it's gonna open up this thing. Now, what's the difference between HKCU and HKLM? So HKCU is HK current user, so that means the current user, whenever logged in, will trigger these things. Now, HKLM means whenever the system is started, which HKLM stands for HK local machine, then these things will be started. Did you add Discord to this VM to simulate a real system? Yeah, possibly. I like that loud noise. Now, since we figured this part of this stuff out just based on the behavior analysis alone, we need to now figure out, okay, does this thing do anything different when we launch it with a argument? So let's try this again. Let's turn on capture again, and then we'll do data technology data -- data. Let's see what happens. We'll add this thing to the filter. As you can see, it's still running. It hasn't exited since then. Now, normally, if you have network enabled, you might start to see network traffic coming out of this. But at the moment, it does not. if we did have network enabled, which we can quickly do actually. There are various ways you can simulate network traffic in a VM. You can use something like FakeNet, which is also from Ambient. It was developed by FireEye specifically. Unfortunately, FakeNet is no longer being maintained, I think, even FakeNet NG. Personally, though, and I already knew what the C2 is, but in case you didn't already, I'm going to show you guys how I go about creating a network that loops back to the current machine. Let me grab the C2 real quick. This is something you might want to do if you want to try to write your own proof of concept controller. This is not really necessary, but just in case you feel like doing this, this method isn't really I don't really see people document this very often. But this trick I like to use is I can create a new fake network controller by going into Device Manager and selecting Add Legacy Hardware and network adapters. You can have Microsoft Loopback adapter. And what you can then do is go to Control, Network Sharing, change the adapter settings. And then we can set the IP to wherever we wanted. I think it'll follow. And do this. So in this case, the C2 is actually something like this. Nope, as you can see, it's trying to connect to that now. So that's one way you can go about it if you want like just to test traffic against a known C2. Now, if it's a domain based, then you can just go change the host file and change it to like redirect it to localhost. That's one way to go about it as well. Now if we check capture now. I think I can turn it off now. We check network activity. Oh, I can keep running. Eventually, it's gonna be like, hey, it's trying to connect this network. Now, normally, when you have a properly set up network environment, if you don't, and you actually want to connect to a C2, what you usually do is you just open up the network and have it connected there, and then you can find the C2 from there. That's one way to go about it, if you just want to do pure dynamic analysis. Now, that's not a great way to go about it, because ideally, you want to be controlling whether or not it actually is connected, when and if it connects to the actual C2. Now, to do that, we need to actually delve into the debugger and disassembler. Touching TA infrastructure. So that is something you might want to do, depending on whether or not you're comfortable with it. If you're just starting off, like I said, do not connect to a network. Do not connect the network adapter to anywhere, unless you have a properly isolated network environment like I do. I don't really mind being visited by the threat actor, because believe it or not, studying threat actor behaviors is actually something you want to do as an experienced malware developer as well. That's not something I will recommend any novices or beginners to do, because that's very dangerous. But if you're seasoned enough, then it is something you want to look into as well, because a lot of times you can learn a lot about the threat actor based on what they're doing. For example, are they coming in here and then if they came in here, what did they do actually? Did they execute any command? Did they try to upload any files, etc., etc.? So this is something you should actually do as an experienced malware researcher, but only if you are confident enough that you won't get exposed. because that's not always something advisable. Only do if you're confident enough in your ability and confident that you have decent OPSEC. Anyways, back to what we're saying. So at this rate, we already know that it does persistence. It does seem to try to connect to a C2. The next stage would probably be opening up a debugger in disassembler. Now, before that, I do want to mention there was one thing I've been opening up every now and then. It's called System Informer. Remember in the tools that we mentioned, there's something called Process Explorer. Process Explorer is kind of like buffed up Task Manager, but System Informer is like the open source version of this, except it's also way better because, you know, it's open source. A lot of people can implement things and fix things, etc., etc. So this is why I like to use System Informer the most. As you can see, it's basically a souped up task manager. Gives you a list of processes, and you can see a lot about a process just from the columns alone. Like, for example, the start time, like when a process started, etc., etc. A lot of things you can see under System Informer as well, so including things like services. You can also sort by key modified time, so that, you know, whenever a service gets added, you'll see it first at the top of the list. And network, you can see whether or not if something is trying to reach out to a certain network address. You can sort by remote address. This firewall devices you're going to use less in a system environment, in a testing environment, but these are actually somewhat helpful if you are using System Informer on your real system or your main computer. But most of the time, you're just going to be tabbing between these three. Now, I won't be delving too much into System Informer here, but the basics is I would recommend download the latest Canary version because the Canary version gets updated the most and usually has the most features. Stable doesn't get updated very often. At least I don't know if it does anymore. Like back when System Informer was just born, previously it was called Process Hacker. Back when System Informer was just being born, basically this is V3. This stable was barely getting updated. I don't know if it does these days, but I personally prefer to be on the Canary version. Now there are a lot of other things you can do in here. You can, for example, enable theming support. By default, it's like light mode. You can also start as admin by default. You can also you can also use the kernel mode driver. Kernel mode driver shows you a lot more things. Because if something is elevated system, you might not be able to always access things in memory if you wanted to. And yeah, the main reason for System Informer's rebrand, this is kind of, you know, out of topic a little bit, but the main reason Process Hacker got a rebrand to System Informer was because originally Process Hacker was developed by one person. It still kind of is, but originally it was developed under an individual's name, and then eventually Microsoft added the certificate hash into the block kernel driver list. And there was a whole other thing as well for System Informer, Process Hacker v Microsoft. There was a lot of drama that happened, but then eventually to get rid of all of that, they rebranded to System Informer, so that now System Informer also operates under the original developer's new company, which is I forgot what it's called, but basically it's now under a company as opposed to an individual. To presumably have better leverage against Microsoft, I don't really know, but that's basically the main reason why it got rebranded. It's basically to fix the whole thing with Microsoft. Otherwise, Process Hacker is like well known and a lot of times marked by Defender and whatnot. Now, I highly recommend you playing around with the System Informer, not even just in like the test environment. I would recommend installing it on your own system as well, just to play around with it to see if it helps you in any way. Because a lot of times System Informer is actually very, very helpful in diagnosing things, since you can see the individual threads, the individual handles that are being opened, the memory in here. You can even take a look at the strings in here, etc., etc. You can take a look at windows that it's created, and far more than what's being shown in the tabs. Since there's also a lot of stuff in the right-click menu as well. Go play around. Now, before we move on to the disassembler and debugger, I'm gonna go take a restroom break. I'll be right back. Okay, so let's get back to things, shall we? I don't want to. So for the next following section, I won't be delving too deep into both Disassembler and Debugger, but just give you a rough idea of how things usually are. So let's first open up this in IDA, the thing that we assume to be the actual malware. Okay, so I'm going to assume this is your first time in IDA. Actually, I'm going to leave it as is. And let's talk about what we're looking at right now. So, by default, IDA looks like this. You'll see what is known as a function name over on the left. This is where the various disassembled functions are. In the bottom left, you'll see something called a graph overview, which, as the name suggests, it gives you an overview of the graph, which contains the logical flow of the function you're looking at. And the main one being IDA view. IDA view can be in graph view or in text view. You can switch between graph view and text view by hitting spacebar. Now, most of the time, you'll probably be spending your time in text view. But if you want to switch over to graph view, you can take a look at the various logic flows that, for example, if this jump was the jump condition for this, if it's false, it jumps to over there. If it's true, it jumps over here. Go the other way around. Yeah. And there's also this hex view tab, which, well, as the name suggests, it gives you a hexadecimal view of the various things you're looking at. Local types. Local types is where you would create the various types that you might want to use in the pseudocode or the disassembler. Local types, this is something you might use more when you want to create structs and enums. You can do that by hitting Insert, and there's a C syntax view here. You can right-click, Add Type, same thing. You can also parse declarations if you want to import type definitions. You can also do things like load file and parse the header file. You can also import log types from here as well. Imports, this shows you all the imports that is used by the malware. Now, I won't be going into the basics of PE here, mainly because that will be like another 1 hour on its own. I don't really feel like talking about that here, but I think I did mention it in the original episode of Malware Deconstructed, so if you want to learn more about that, either check the Microsoft documentation or check that video. Now, exports function. These are the export functions declared by the DLL. If you're looking at a DLL, that is. Now, there are some initial setups like you do if this is your first time in here. So first of all, you can go into general. One thing I like to do is I like to change the number of opcode bytes to something like 8 or 10 or something like that. 8 at minimum usually. That way, the default is 0. So this is what it look like. When you set that to a value greater than 0, it shows you the number of hexadecimal bytes that this particular line represents. So for example, this compare, you can see it starts with A3, 3D, etc., etc. This might be helpful if you're trying to write a R rule. Alternatively, you can, if you are familiar enough with assembly, you can also just identify instructions by looking at the hex here. Now, let's say if you aren't familiar enough with assembly, this is something I think most people get tripped up on. If you're not sure what you're looking at, like for example, I don't know what move means. I don't know what C, move, and B means. What you can do is turn on something called auto comments. It'll tell you what that particular instruction does. So this is move if not below. And this is compare between two operands, etc., etc. Now, this is particularly helpful if you're not familiar with some of the instructions you might be seeing, and if you don't want to look them up online necessarily. I usually have that off because I usually know what I'm looking at. But, you know, for the sake of this, let's just keep it on. Now, there is technically more in here that would change, but by default, this is usually good enough. But I do want to bring your attention to the strings view real quick. The strings options. In here, you can change the code page that IDA uses to determine whether or not if something is a string. Sometimes you may want to change this to other code page numbers. By default, it uses UTF-8. But if you want, you can add things like simplified Chinese in here, which will be 936. And for Japanese, it would be 932. These two are like the most common ones that I have to use sometimes. If the string that I know of is a Chinese string or a Japanese string, it doesn't get resolved properly as UTF-8. Then I'll come in here and change that to other values. You can change that to other values by using insert. Type 936. And then it'll start to treat the strings as Chinese. I'm going to set that back to UTF-8 for now. Now, speaking of strings, you can take a look at the strings by pressing Shift plus F12. You can also check that in View, Open Subviews, and Strings. Here it is. Now, by default, there is also something I like to change because a lot of times people will miss strings just because of the IDA default being you only printing standard ASCII strings. What we can do is go to right-click, Setup. And under all of these, I want you to check Unicode C style. That way it'll show the white strings as well. Sometimes in Windows there are two types of strings. There's the standard ASCII string and there's the white string. And Windows nowadays uses Unicode string, so that's the white string. And by default, is not shown in IDA's string view, so you might want to turn that on. So for example, if I didn't have that turned on, you'll see that all of that string was just not being shown. So you might want to go to Setup and turn that on. That way you'll get to see majority of the strings. And most of the time, you only really see white string and short strings, standard ASCII strings. That's about it. The other ones, not so much. But yeah, as you can see, if I didn't have that turned on, I would have missed crucial information such as these. They're just not there anymore. But I didn't have that turned on. Okay, now, if you're unfamiliar with assembly in general, what I'd like you to do is press F5. It'll give you something called a decompile code. And decompile is not the quite right term here. The more correct term would be pseudocode, since it more or less translates it to a pseudo-usable C-like syntax. So what you're seeing here is not necessarily something you could just copy and paste into your own C code, expect it to work. A lot of times you'll need some fixing. A lot of times the pseudocode might not be accurate as well. You shouldn't use what it says on here as a factual truth. You should only use it as a guidance. For example, IDA will sometimes miss, or not even just IDA, a lot of other different disassemblers will sometimes miss a certain chunk of code just because it didn't properly interpret the disassembly on the right there. Now, there's also another thing I like to mention. By default, when you open up F5, it'll actually jump out as a different tab like this. If you wanted to automatically go to the left like this, you may need to change the IDA options. Is in the, I think, IDA UI CFG or something. No, not IDA UI. It's IDA CFG. No, it's not. Which one is it? Hex race. There we go. You may need to change this option to pseudocode dock position to left or whatever you want. But that's optional. It just makes your life a little bit easier so that it automatically jumps over to the left. And why do I want it to be on the left? That's because there is something we can turn on called synchronize with. So when I right click on the pseudocode here, it says synchronize with. You can see that it can synchronize with IDA view. So that whenever I select a certain line on here, it will automatically jump to the disassembly that's on the right. And same thing as well. If I select a certain thing over here, it will jump over to the corresponding pseudocode. I usually have this on so that it makes looking at things a little bit easier. And if I have to switch between functions, it'll automatically follow as well. But scroll through here. Yep. Okay. So now we have that figured out. Let's talk about some basic keyboard controls. So there are a few basic ones you need to know of. First of all, is something called xref, cross-reference. When you see a member, you might want to see where exactly it's used elsewhere. Like, for example, if I see sleep, I may want to see where else sleep is used. I can press X or right-click, jump to reference to operand. As you can see, it'll provide me a list of things, instructions where sleep is also called. And and that might be helpful if you want to take quickly look at where things are referenced. Now, same thing can be applied to any member in IDA that's on the disassembly view, so any of the highlighted ones. For example, if I want to see where this function is referenced, I can also press X. As you can see, it's referenced here. Now, another few things I like to mention is, let's go to this one of the strings real quick. Let's say this one, right? Let's say for whatever reason, this you don't like how this string is defined. Let's say it might not be the correct size. Actually, that's probably not that good example. Let's go down here. Might be a better example. So, okay, for example here, you can see that there is a bunch of hex strings, hexified blocks here. And based on what I'm seeing, I can assume this is probably a string. This is probably a short string. Because it doesn't have a bunch of zeros in between. That means it's not a Unicode string, and it falls under the standard ASCII range. So, how do I turn this into a readable string? You can right-click, and then you can either do R, which would just turn this into a readable char, or you can press A, and you can convert this into a string. And as you can see, it automatically determined, oh, well, these two should be together because it terminates at the null byte. So I press A, directly convert to string, and it changed that to cmd.exe, which is a more readable string than whatever this was, right? And sometimes you might also want to undefine something as well. Let's see if I code a block or a string that you don't really think is accurate. I can undefine by pressing U. And Control Z to roll back, of course. Or alternatively, I thought it's in the context menu somewhere, but no. I can press A. Now, you might notice that when I press A, well, it doesn't rebuild the string correctly. Because, why is that? It's only reading this as a dash and terminate at null. So that's because, as mentioned earlier, by default, to determine a short string, it will terminate at the first null byte. So if I do A, then it'll just think, oh, this is a standard string. There is nothing after that. But that's not the case because we know this is a UTF-16 wide string. Now, how do we define this as a wide string? You can hold Alt plus A. And it'll show this string literal dialog here. And here we can define whichever string type we want it to be. By default, it's a C style one, which is the standard string. But here we know it's a UTF-16 one, so we can select Unicode C style. And here we go. Now it's properly recreate the string. And if you made any changes here, by the way, you may also need to rebuild the string table. For example, let me create a bunch here. Okay, now we have a bunch of new strings. Let's go back to the string table. You'll see that, hey, where's the cmd.exe? It's not here. That's because you'll need to first right-click and then rebuild. And then it'll show up again. Because this string view is actually cached. By default, it doesn't update it if anything changes. So you need to rescan again. And to rescan, you need to click rebuild. Now, in IDA, you might also sometimes want to change the type. Now, this is a little bit more advanced, so I won't be talking too deeply into it about it here, but just know that one thing you might want to use sometimes is you might want to change the type. So you can select any of the variables, for example, and then press Y, and you can tell IDA which type it's supposed to be. Now, to determine which type is what, it's more or less an experience thing. I can't really explain to you how I know what is probably what type. You'll just have to eventually figure out what type looks like what, etc., etc. You can also use that on functions, and then you can edit the function prototype here. For example, if I know that A2 is like, oh, I don't know, char pointer or something, then I can just do like char asterisk, something like that. And you can also rename various things that you've come across by pressing un. So for example, if I Let's see what this function does. Looks like it's checking the arc size. No, this is the arc size. Yeah. Okay, so let's say if I know that this is a if I know this is for checking arguments, then I can just click on the function name and then type and then press N. I could just go check argument count, because that is basically what it's doing here. And if it's larger than 1, then it'll enter here. And just like that, you can go from something that is completely unreadable, like, I don't know what any of these variables are. I don't know what any of these functions do. They're all only called sub underscore something something, the address where they're referenced. That is not particularly readable. But with renaming, you'll be able to figure out, okay, eventually you'll be able to figure out, okay, well, this is possibly what, this is possibly what. And then eventually you'll be able to build a more named list of function that you can iterate through and look at. Now, let's take a look at what happens when, so we already established that this checks the argument count and see if it's larger than 1. If it is, then it'll come in here and then do a bunch of things that we don't really know what any of these does yet. But there is a general rule of thumb. If you see a switch case that's like pretty long, then most of the time you can likely determine that it's probably going to be a command handler. Now in this case, how do I know? Because if you click into any of these functions, you'll see that, hey, it does a thing. And click into this other thing, it does a thinner thing. And in the end of it, it probably sends the data back to the C2 somewhere. And I know that because I've already looked at this before. But for example, I see case 0xa, you're like, okay, it's trying to create a remote shell here. How do I know this? Because it creates a new command.exe and then creates two read-write pipes. So I can rename this to create remote shell or something like that. Now earlier, there are a bunch of other things in here as well. If we're unsure what API might this thing call, you can take a look at the import table. Now, this won't always be reliable because a lot of malware actually just resolves their functions at runtime. So a lot of times, what they're using won't actually show up in the import table. Well, let's say if it does, we can check the libraries, various libraries. We can see that it references various WinHTTP libraries. So we know that it's at least communicating using HTTP in some degree, because if we go into any of these, press cross-reference, and see that, hey, it does send things over to the C2 via post. We check out the server name. You can see that it was populated around here, and this is the C2 itself. And you can see it creates a post request and send it over, and then reads a response. Now, how do we verify this? Let's say, let's bring up the debugger now. So usually you want to start debugging from the launcher and then wait until it loads into the DLL. So here we can open up and x64 debug. And if you're starting off, you can turn on, okay, this is Windows a little bit too big. I might need to change the scaling. Hang on. That's 150%, so it's easier to read, but it doesn't fit. That's okay, because we can resize in here. Thank you, x64debug, for implementing this. Now, if you're just starting off, I would recommend turning on breaking at DLL entry. This is not always necessary, but that way you'll know when a DLL has been loaded and it's just reached the entry point. You can also set it at load as well, but usually if you're just starting off, I think entry is fine enough. Now, for the basic controls of x64 debug, there are a few things you need to know of. So first of all, there's F7. F7 stands for stepped in. So that way, whenever it sees an instruction, it'll step to the next thing, and then if it's a call instruction, they'll step into it. Like for example, there is a call here. If I press F7, it'll walk inside it. If I press F8, then it'll walk over it. If I press F9, it'll just continue executing until the next breakpoint. Oh, sorry, I didn't see this question until now. How often do you use the pseudocode for Rust and Go samples, especially with hex rate changes from last year? I would say it's decent enough, especially for Go these days. Hex rate is continually improving upon the Golang decompiler, and I'd say it's pretty readable now. Assuming you're not dealing with a garble obfuscated sample, that is. Rust, not so much. Rust, you still kind of have to rely on Flirt for that, because it's a little bit more readable, sure, but like still not great. So a lot of times, if you're dealing with a Rust library, a lot of times the dependency will be baked in. The libraries will be baked into the executable, and it'll make the executable really big and really annoying to read. What you can do is you can build your own Flirt signature based on that specific Rust version it's using and then the libraries it's using. I would recommend looking into Rust bin info for that. You can rebuild a lot of the Rust type signature and types and whatnot by creating a Flirt signature for it. Now, if you actually have your IDA license, and you have 9.2 or above, I think it was introduced in, I forgot it was introduced in 9 or 9.2. I think it was in 9. There's something called IDA feeds now, and when you do download IDA from Hexbase himself, you also receive a list of signatures. A list of Flirt signatures you can use, and IDA feeds now allows you to basically bulk apply or bulk check whether or not the current executable matches one or more Flirt signatures. And with IDA feeds, you can apply multiple Flirt signatures at once. So, for example, if you have a large Rust binary, you can create Flirt signature for all of the reference libraries, and then apply all of the Rust Flirt signatures at once. It'll really help identify which part is what code and what part is benign. Sorry, what part is benign and what part is, at the very least, unknown. Look into that. If you have proper IDA license, IDA feeds actually been relatively helpful, I would say. Okay. My throat needs a rest. I'm gonna have my cough drop real quick before I continue. I struggle with this whenever I do training at work as well. Like speaking for hours on end really kills my throat. Which, what we're doing right now is kind of similar to what I do at work for training. I'm gonna rest for a bit. So when I woke up earlier today, I was gonna do like brainstorming session for what we're about to do today, as well as work on a thumbnail, and which I clearly did not get to do because I slept in. I also had the thought of getting some White's Monster before doing the whole stream, and then obviously didn't have time for that. Put this up on so the people scrolling by the timeline will know. Actually, I should probably just create a new mid-break. Seems like you're recording. Let me know if you prefer less complicated, unrelated questions to sample you're working on. Not really. I mean, you can ask anything. Whatever you're comfortable with, really. In fact, I prefer people to ask questions so that it doesn't feel like I'm not talking to myself. Also, it's less so that I'm recording, it's more so, you know, I'm stream on YouTube as well, so people can watch the VOD whenever. Stomach feeling kind of funny. Me, it's because I haven't had lunch yet. By the way, it's lunch hours here. It's like 12:59 here. Your device will restart outside of active hours. Thanks. What did I get installed just now? Windows Update, man. Wow. More Copilot. Whoa. Yay. So on my host machine, I am running on Insider Beta. Sorry, Insider. I'm not gonna say which branch. Not Beta though. I just checked the changelog. It's more Copilot. Cool. Okay. All right, well, let's get back to it. There's one thing you might want to use. I personally don't use it as much anymore, but there is a plugin for both x64 debug and IDA, something called Return Sync or RET Sync. Basically, it synchronizes the lines between both IDA and x64 debug, so that whenever you're stepping through x64 debug, it automatically changes the line number that's being displayed on IDA. That is something you can use. I personally don't use them anymore because I don't really find it necessary. But if you're just starting off, I think that would be a good plugin to have. Oh wait, right, network's not on. Now let's remember how we just started the thing. So let's press. You can see which module we're on via the thing on the top left there, or you can also see the current module based on the text here. As you can see, we are still in the exe. So you press F9 again. Okay, we're at the executable. No, we are at the module now because. Okay, we guys really can't see this. Oh my god, this is tiny. But you can also see from the disassembly here that the main module is now this KU-GOU thing. And so that means we are currently at the entry point of the DLL. Now, there's one thing that I've kind of noticed that people don't, when people are starting off, they do get kind of confused. Like, okay, how do I quickly jump between, let's say if I didn't have the return to sync plugin, how do I quickly find out where I am in x64 debug versus in IDA? Like, okay, I know that I'm at the entry point, so I can just go to, I can just go to DLL entry point. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's where I am. But let's say if I am not there, let's say I'm in this call, right? How do I know where this call is located in IDA? Oh, didn't get a follow. What we could do is you can do following dump, or alternatively, you can also just select a bunch of them, and then copy the hex value. But following dump is a little bit easier. Follow select address. Have you seen the decoys for this one? I don't believe there's a decoy for this one. It's referenced, sure, but like there isn't really a name for it. Rather, it's not included. Now, to quickly jump between here and there, what we can do is we can select where these bytes here, and then you can just do Alt-B. Oh my god, this is so tiny you guys can't see it. Maybe we should restart IDA. They changed the DLLs a lot since they used. How do I explain this without getting my parent company pissed? This is more or less a throwaway thing they use. This is not an actual malware family that they frequently use. This is something they just wrote in the whim. So this isn't really not quite what you're saying, is what I'm saying. By the way, you can change the font size in here. If you're on IDA 9.2, you can just do Control Plus, but this is 9.1, so we don't have that. Yes, it took them way too many years to implement Control Plus to zoom in and out. Anyways, to quickly check where we are, we can just go to Alt-B and then do a little search. And then you can see we are actually in the security in a cookie thing, which is, the standard MSVC things. Not something written by a developer, because that is always going to be present in DLL entry point. This is written with MSVC. This doesn't even count as a loader or downloader. No, this is actually the backdoor itself. Like I said, don't always assume that all APT actors write the most sophisticated things ever out there, because like occasionally they'll write these throwaway ones. And I've seen a lot of people dismiss this particular malware, this particular sample, as something so benign that even the most basic malware developer can't write. I think what a lot of people don't understand is that threat hunting is very difficult. And if you write something so benign, something so simple, a lot of times threat detection won't actually pick this up. Because remember, the more sophisticated you write your malware, the more profilable it is. The more detection rules you can write for it. Let's say you use a particular obfuscator. Let's say use LLVM, like these guys usually do. You can write a rule for LLVM very easily. And a lot of times you can just flag those right away. Now you might be thinking, well, anyone that look at this sample will be like, okay, this is malware, clearly. Virus Solo might even flag it with like 30 plus positives. You might be like, okay, how is this any special? A lot of times, if you don't have the additional context clues, if you aren't familiar enough with the group, a lot of times when we see a sample like this, you won't really be able to establish this malware back to the malware family. Sorry, the threat group. Because if I looked at this, I'll be like, oh yeah, it's probably just some skitty that wrote this. So a lot of times, simple tools like this actually does more on the threat intelligence aspect than you might expect. Because first of all, it makes the attribution a little bit more difficult, because if it's something so simple, and if something that is so common, a simple backdoor like this anyone can write. There's also the fact that is sometimes less detectable than you might think. You might think that most malware engine will be able to flag this, which most of them do, yes, but sometimes the simple stuff really does fly below the radar. Like, I'm not talking about this particular sample, but like there are other samples that are like written so basically, and a lot of times the malware detection engines just won't flag something like that. Something that can't be connected nor attributed to anyone, right? Search rated with a lack of code similarity and code styles using previously used techniques. Yes. Now in this particular case, because I know this group's inside and out already, I can already tell this is something written by them. It also doesn't help that they dropped in more Easter egg strings. This group that likes to add a lot of funny Easter eggs. So I think in this case, it's more or less this is a throwaway thing. Than, in fact, sometimes it might also be just them playing around. It's hard to tell. You have to be, yeah. The thing with threat intelligence is every researcher has to come up with their own conclusion with varying level of confidence. You can't just look at a clue and be like, okay, this is definitively this or that. You have to look at multiple clues and then come to a conclusion as to whether or not this conclusion makes sense. Now, in this particular case, I know this is definitely them because of the freaking funny ass Easter egg strings, right? Go Turkey, I'm Chinese, haha, etc., etc. They also like to use this alongside message boxes and whatnot, and various things like that. And I already kind of knew about the C2 as well. So in this case, I'm pretty confident that this is them. But like for anyone that's just starting off, they might not be able to recognize what's what. And a lot of this is really just experience than anything. Specifically what the other chatter was mentioning earlier, that this might be something that they've been using and they changed a whole lot. That's referring to another thing called miniplug, and that one recently got a lot of changes, yes, and it's from the same group. Anyways, I like to get back to the basics now. So we are currently still at the beginning of DL main, the initialization routine for NSVC. So what we like to do is we like to go to DL main right now. We'll get to let's see, where is it? So if we follow the code, you'll see that it's actually coming in from data importer main, this export address, export function. And how do we find this out? We can actually go back to here, the main launcher. You can see where exactly it's trying to reference this. As you can see, it's trying to call load library on this thing, and we're currently being loaded. That's why we're at the initial entry point. But we're not actually triggering the malware just yet because the actual entry point is not in DLL main. What it's actually doing is about to call data importer main. And so what that actually happens is after the library has been loaded, the actual malware hasn't been actually executed yet. Well, technically it has, but like, the actual malicious part isn't in the domain. It's actually in the address that's about to be referenced, which is their import main. And how do we set a breakpoint over there? We can go to symbols and go into here and then click see data import main, and we can right click, toggle breakpoint. Or we can just press F2. Now we can just press F9 again, and nothing happened. Let's try again. Right. Remember why? We might need to include that. Try again. Nope. Let's try running it in the directory that we're expected to run this at. Oh, wait. Hang on. I know why. Okay. Well, let's talk about this real quick. So, why did the malware just exit early there? If we remember, if we go back to the main here, you can see it actually does create a mutex here. So if we go back here, if we set breakpoint at create mutex, and we can do that by typing in a command here at the bottom left. We can type bp create mutex a, which will set a breakpoint. So next time we step into this mutex, as you can see, it does create a mutex called global technology 360-a at p dash or a at t dash team. And as you can see, it says, oh, it returns already exists. And if it sees already exists, it'll just exit the process. A lot of times, malware will create mutex or objects, and they'll try to create it. And if it sees that someone else already owns the handle to that particular mutex or object or event, then it'll just exit. This is a way for it to prevent itself from running multiple times. As you can see, we previously already had this running, so it will never reach. It'll never reach the initialization. Sorry, the actual main part of the malware because of this particular check. Did you find out this was a threat actor you dealt with before from another cluster of similar samples? No, not necessarily. So, I don't think I can answer this really. At least if I feel like if I explain myself, then I might expose a few things that I should probably keep secret. But all I can say is no. Like I said, a lot of this is mostly experience and whatnot, so the reason why I can attribute this to them is multitude of factors. That's all I can say. It doesn't break the NDA necessarily, but I don't think well, first of all, the threat actor might be watching this video. Second, I think my company would not necessarily be happy with this, even though this is technically a white sample now. I think I'll be fine. It's just, I don't think it's wise for me to talk about it, is what I'm saying. Now let's so if we now when we run the thing, since we killed the other process that was holding the mutex, we can now see that we have reached the breakpoint that is at data import main. So now we can go back to data import main. I open up this by pressing G, which is jump to address. Just go in here. And I won't be going into the detail for every single function in here, mainly because it takes a little bit of time. But I just want to jump over to this particular function here. Mainly because, well, first of all, we already established it checks the argument count. But also since this is the main C2 command handler thread, function. And how do we set a breakpoint here? How do we know where this is? Well, if you are on an x86 binary, you can usually, since the if the malware isn't big enough for it to reach over like 10,000 what you can do is you can just change the last four digits, and they'll usually be where exactly you're looking for. So let's just say 390. So you can see, yeah, it is what we're looking for because it's at the beginning of the function. But if you're not sure, like let's say if I'm not sure where this is in the memory, you could just Shift E, which will give you the hexified data of it. You can just do Control B in here and paste it in here, and just uncheck Start from Selection, by the way, and press OK. We are not over there. We might need to Control Shift B. Oh wait, I know why. You need to choose a smaller section that doesn't involve a static address. Try this one. Try this again. And we got that from... You can be rest assured that the last few digits will always be the same. So the 39B1, here it is. And yeah, it's exactly where we selected earlier. So now we can just run. So it reaches the breakpoint. It doesn't. It actually says the Word file is corrupted. And why is that? Well, let's go see where that is. So we already know that this was referenced in a string here. And we can use... Oops. We can use cross-reference to go to where the string is referenced. And you'll see that it's trying to establish persistence. As you can see, it tried to set the registry value for the run key. And prompted us to restart the computer. And what's actually happening here is it actually didn't really run the malicious part where it contacts the C2, but instead it creates a persistence and then expects you to restart the computer for it to trigger the malware. This is also kind of helpful in a way for anti-sandboxing, kind of, because like, you know, the malware, the malicious part won't actually be triggered. It won't contact the C2 because, you know, it will only be triggered if there's an argument appended to it. And obviously sandboxes won't know that. And it will only really do that if, first of all, you know that there's an argument that needs to be passed, or the user has reviewed the computer. So that will be run with a argument. By the way, there's a little tip I can give for you. If you think having to do this scrolling is a bit annoying, IDA doesn't have word wrapping, unfortunately. What we can do is you can go to decompiler options. You can change the right margin to something a little bit smaller. So it's 50. That way it'll do a line break for you. So let's start from the top. You can see that it's trying to create a directory. And if it doesn't, if it tries to create a directory and it sees that the last ert is equal to, or if it's equal to Zurich's B7, which is already exists, I think. Error already exists, there is. Then it'll still continue. And then it'll try to copy the file. That includes this loader file. Sorry, this malware malicious DLL. It'll also try to create this 123.123 as 123.pdf. Now, unfortunately, this file doesn't exist, at least not in the sample pack that we were given. I'll copy it over to the new directory. I think as well as the main launcher here. By the way, whenever you go into a function, so IDA doesn't really create a function prototype until you've clicked into it, or rather, it doesn't. The decompiler output is not up to date until you've cycled through all of the functions referenced in a function. So as you can see, there is a red v17 here. And when we click into it, it actually takes 2 arguments. You'll see that, oh, it only takes 1. Why is that? Well, sometimes you'll need to refresh the stale decompile output by pressing F5 again. then it'll actually show up in the new things. As you can see, there's actually this little function here that has a bunch of other strings related to it. It's a bunch of strings that are not printed, but they are there regardless. These are basically the Easter egg strings that this group likes to use. They sometimes put random stuff in there. Anyways, the reason why we got this was because we didn't start it with, well, we need to go into the new directory. As opposed to the one we were currently at. So we can once again do BP at over here. A smaller one. Wait, are we at the... No, we're not at the DLL yet. Let's try that again. Smaller section that does involve a static address. Or we can just change the last 4 digits as well. No, this is you'll have a better life if you just use return sync. I personally don't use it because I don't really need it personally. Anyways, press F2 here, and then now we're here. And from here, you can start going into each function and figure out what does what. Now, there is a little technique that I would recommend if you're starting off. If you're unsure what a particular function does, you can sometimes get away with feeding the disassembly in a function to an LLM and see if it can figure out what does what. Always be aware when you do this, there will almost always be hallucination somewhere, even if it's like a really good model. That, and there's also the consideration of TLP. If this is a sensitive sample and you are not running a local LLM, do not do it. If you are using a local LLM and this is not a particularly sensitive sample, then I would sure do that, whatever. But just keep that in mind, because your data will be sent to the person hosting the model otherwise. Anyways, what local LLM are you using? I'm not going to be answering that part, but I can say most of the local LLMs do not do a great job of interpreting disassembly, or at least not for reverse engineering. I would not trust the pseudocode output out of most local models. That's all I will say. I would say only do that if you are confident enough in your ability to comb through these disassembly, because you gotta remember, your focus is disassembly. The disassembly is the factual truth, the ground truth. It is what will be executed on the machine. The pseudocode, as well as the ones generated or comments generated by an LLM, is, well, they aren't always necessarily accurate. In fact, if you do feed it to an LLM, a lot of times it might be inaccurate. I'm not saying it is inaccurate, or it will be inaccurate, but always know what you're looking at in the disassembly before you consider the output of the pseudocode generated by IDA, other disassemblers, or other LLMs. You do not want to take everything at face value, especially when you're looking through pseudocode. A lot of times, IDA and many other disassemblers, they'll fail to interpret certain things. LLM will generate hallucinations. They will sometimes just think, this function, even though it's never read the entirety of this particular function that's referenced, it'll think that this must be this or that. You'll try to guess and rename the various function names sometimes, unless you explicitly tell it not to. And it'll come up with a lot of assumptions, which may or may not be correct. Sometimes it is correct, sometimes it is not. Just always be aware of that. Now, if this were me, well, first of all, when I come in here, I have noticed one thing, and you can see that there is a little check here that says 8899AABB. When I scrolled all the way down here, earlier we checked that there is a part that sends a post, right, to the C2. And then after that, here it does the parsing of the actual command. And as you can see at the beginning, it does check for this magic byte. So it does check for this AA99ABB thing. And then it'll see, and then it'll it'll parse the command code accordingly to it, and then do various things. Now, we first established that this is a create remote shell. Now there are a lot of, if you're unsure how a remote shell is created or how one works, there are actually a lot of different malware, open source malware you can look at. All of them implement pretty much the same thing. For example, Ghost has its own remote shell thing, and a lot of times they'll look the same because you need to have a read and write pipe to write to the shell it's spawning, which is command.exe. We check on this one. Well, we can see that there's a bunch of global bytes being flipped around. Let's see where else this is referenced. You can see that it's referenced in create remote shell. And this gets flipped to 1, and this gets flipped to 0. So I'm going to assume that this is something like a remote shell running, or something like that. And this seems to be the opposite of that. Because, like, you can see that this got changed to remote shell is running. If it is, then they'll reset it because it will terminate the process as well as close out the various handles, including the pipes. I'm going to assume this is like close remote shell. Yeah, standard string operation. Okay, so this checks if the shell is running. If it is, then we write to the pipe. How do we know this is a pipe? Because we check in here, you can see that this is a pipe that was written, that was created for it. So we can see that it's writing to the pipe. So we can assume this is write to remote shell. Now, this is basically what I do at work. Not necessarily like this for every sample, but this is the basic gist of it, right? You would do a mix of static, behavioral, dynamic analysis all at once sometimes. Your job is to... Well, first of all, it depends on exactly what you're trying to achieve. If you are a pure malware researcher, if you don't care about the surrounding context, then sure, you might want to spend all day reversing engineering the entirety of the binary. You might want to comb through every single thing that's ever done. Now, for me, as a threat intel researcher, that's not the most important thing for me. You have to keep in mind this particular sample is relatively easy to analyze. But that's not always necessarily the case. Sometimes there'll be obfuscated ones, sometimes there'll be very, very complicated ones. Your job as a malware researcher or a threat intel researcher is not necessarily spending time on reverse engineering the entirety of the malware, but rather just to get a rough understanding of what it does. And if you can figure out the encoding, the encryption, decryption, what it does, its capabilities, etc., then that's usually good enough. because the more important thing for you as a threat researcher or a malware researcher that's particularly focused on chasing after a certain group, you might be more interested in finding out the surrounding context. So, for example, that might be these geopolitical context clues that we sourced earlier. It might be the C2. Like, what C2 infrastructure is this thing using? Does it have any known certificates? Does it have any known other samples that are connecting to it, etc., etc.? So basically what I'm saying is, I don't think I'm going to go through the entire sample today here, but I do want to use this to serve as a basic starting point for you to start working on your own malware analysis. After you got everything set up, familiarize yourself with IDA, familiarize yourself with x64 debug, maybe even dnspy as well, because dnspy, actually, we're going to touch a little bit on it as well after this. Just play around. A lot of people will be like, I don't know how to get into malware research as a beginner. And a lot of times it's just the matter of actually start doing it. Eventually you'll have enough experience to quickly figure out what does what's the most important thing, what breakpoint do I set, etc., etc. Yeah, I think I've gone through enough of the basics today for both IDA and x64 debug. Now, there's a lot more to x64 debug I haven't gone into. Like, for example, you can see the various memory blocks. You can take a look at the call stacks. There's a lot of commands you can learn from, but I want you to just give it a try, breakpoint, step through things. You don't even have to do malware at first. You can just open up calculator.exe in IDA and x64 debug. The main thing is just you have to give it a try instead of just being like, oh, I don't know how this works. I'm very confused. Because, like, if you're confused, I would... there are a lot of resources you can look up these days. If you're unsure, ask someone. Ask me. Ask anyone on Twitter. Ask people that are familiar with this matter. Instead of just standing around doing nothing, which is kind of what I did back in the day. I was just like, yeah, I don't know, this looks kind of complicated. I don't really know where I'm supposed to start. You just start trying things, and if you don't know what thing is what, ask people. Okay. I think we can go into dnspy for a little bit. Do I have a sample that I can use though? I actually don't think we need to have a working sample for this. I can just grab a random sample. Grab a random .NET executable. Okay, so this is going to be a very, very quick introduction to looking at .NET Malware. So, first of all, most things you're going to be looking at are either going to be .NET Framework 4 or .NET Framework 2. A lot of times these .NET Framework 4 these days for a modern system. We're not going to go into the .NET 5 and above territory just yet, at least not in this video. But all of them basically are the same kind of, the same concept really. So for example, this is just a benign normal thing, a benign normal module that I pulled up. Does this thing actually have any code inside? I don't think it does. let's just say whatever this is, right? So the thing with .NET, right? So all of the .NET executables are compiled into something called an intermediate language. And an intermediate language can then be parsed back into C# or any other .NET based languages you wanted. You can even do Visual Basic if you really wanted. But by default, if you open it at dnspy, try to reconstruct the IO code and convert it into a readable C# code. Now, they might be more familiar with this, or sometimes you might even think that the C# code is not necessarily. You can even just switch back to IO. And this is what the IO code looks like. And at runtime, all of the IO code is interpreted by the Common Language Runtime, the CLR, and then is executed on the fly by the CLR engine. So really, if you're just starting off, looking at .NET malware is actually relatively easy, I would say, as long as the malware is not obfuscated. If it is obfuscated, then there's a whole can of worms that we can delve into, like Confuser X and whatnot. We're not going to go into that today, but if you just compiled a fresh .NET executable, I would encourage you to pop it into dnspy and take a look around. If it's an executable, you can also start it as an executable. You can also set breakpoints and then take a look around. There are things like breakpoints, and then you can also see like the locals, variables, etc., etc. I'm not going to be able to do any today because I didn't prepare any .NET samples with me. This is just like statically looking at things. But yes, you can set breakpoints. You can change method names. Right-click using edit method. Change username. Change the method name. Change the signature name. Parameter name. And by default, dnspy actually patches out all the debugger detection already. You can check all of them here. And sometimes you might also want to enable debug files loaded from process memory. I do have a deeper dive video, more or less a quick recap on my clips channel, where I go through some of the tips and tricks of using dnspy. But I would recommend, if you're starting off at home, grab async rat, grab a compiled version of async rat as a client, pop into dnspy, try running it, and try debugging it. See how you like it. We already had previous videos on debugging .NET based malware, and so if you want to do that, go take a look. Okay, I think I'm at the end here, because I'm kind of tired already. It's like I've been talking for like 3 hours and 20 minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Twitter, Discord, etc., etc. We do have a Discord, yes. And yeah, I hope you have good luck with your malware reverse engineering journey. I don't know how many people are actually going to be watching this VOD after the fact. I hope in the future, if anyone asks me, I can just link them this VOD. And if there are anything you think that could be explained better, or if there's something we can explain maybe in future streams, let me know in the comments and or chat. And if you somehow made this VOD far into the VOD or stream, hello. Thanks for staying. I think that'll be it. Is there anyone who can raid? I don't know who's alive at this hour. It's like way too late for the US folks. Way too early for the EU folks. Not seeing really anyone I want to raid. Because all the friends of the channel, they're offline right now. Well, I think I'm not gonna raid today, mainly because there's nothing to say to strangers, the ones that want to raid anyways. I'll see you guys next week. I'll probably do another ghost ring later today, by the way. I need to work on the schedule for next week. I need to work on thumbnails for next week. So I'll be back later today. If you're around, stay tuned. If not, well, move next week. All right, bye-bye.